Three, two. Hello, everybody. How you doing? We're back, and I've got a great special guest here, someone who knows a lot about neurology. I can't wait to get into it. Carmen Allen, this is great. Good to see you. Cameron, I'm sorry,
That's all
Ellen.
right. Yeah,
This is
yeah.
great to see you. And let's jump into it because we were just talking off air about how dysregulated our nervous systems happen to be right now
Mm,
with all of the changes that's going on in the world.
mm.
Oh
Yeah,
my goodness,
yeah.
it's
It is
crazy.
wild. It's really wild. Thank you so much for having me on, and even just
Yes.
in our brief conversation so far, just such a privilege to be able to connect with you and to be able to just be here with you. So thank you so much for having me on.
Likewise, we were talking about how the nervous system responds basically to our environment. Could
Mhm.
you elaborate on that a little bit for our
Absolutely.
listeners? Because I'm sure they would love to hear this information.
Absolutely. I think it kind of setting the stage with a little bit of a visualization of, we've all heard about the frog that gets put into a pot of water and the pot of water gets turned on and it starts heating up and the frog's just kind of hanging out in it and continuing and it just continues to rise and rise and rise in heat until the frog just can't tolerate it anymore. And either like finally gets the idea that something's wrong and jumps out or gets cooked. And our nervous system's no different. That so many of us are experiencing this thing where, you know, throughout life, we experience stressors and our nervous system just adapts and it adapts and it adapts. And we continue to just raise something that's called the allostatic load set point. And so it's our stress set point. And so it's what we come to expect. So most of us just say, I'm not that stressed. Everything, this is just how it is. This is just how I show up in life. And this is just how I handle stuff. But what that actually is our nervous system just incrementally ratcheting up and getting more and more intense. And I think what's really fascinating, what I'm seeing with a lot of people and what we were just talking about, is that culturally for us right now, there is so much happening that there are so many different reasons for our nervous system to feel uncertainty. And
Mm,
our brain does not like uncertainty. We want to
mm.
be able to know what to expect. Our brain operates on like, how am I doing in comparison to 15 minutes ago? That's basically what's happening for the most part. And so when our brain doesn't know what's coming at us or what could be on the horizon, we have this really interesting process where we're going to go into trying to predict the future. And our
Right.
anterior cingulate starts coming up with all kinds of stories. And when that happens, the stress and the uncertainty just keeps on ratcheting up. And we keep coming up with new internal narratives that are even subconscious and not fully conscious. But the thing that we all start feeling is increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, increased sense that just something is off, something feels unsafe. And right now, with things that are happening with Iran, things that are happening culturally, things that are happening with ICE, things that are happening even in just like generally over the last 20 years where our communities have continued to get more and more digital. I mean, even residual from 2020 and with
Hmm.
everything with COVID, where we had a lot more separation, we don't have the same community connection and feeling a sense of certainty, feeling in relationship with one another, which when we're in relationship, when we're feeling connected with one another, we're releasing a chemical called oxytocin, feeling really bonded. And that gives us this underlying sense of safety. And right now, that underlying sense of safety is kind of out the window. And so
Mm.
I'm finding that so many people that we're working with are just continuing to kind of recognize something's off. I don't know what it is, but something feels wrong. Something feels uncertain. And I think that we're just sitting in a time right now where there's a lot of unanswered questions, and our nervous system doesn't have a lot of place to turn because we're not as connected as a people as we used to be.
You're on the numbers because I would tell my clients, and I used to teach school, and I would look and see this happening with those kids. They
Hmm.
were very anxious. I would have a classroom of 20 kids, 26 kids sometimes, and I would say, hey, just asking a question, guys. How many of y'all have anxiety issues? Raise your hand. The whole
Mhm.
class would raise their hands.
Absolutely.
And they were like clenching to their electronic devices and all this kind of stuff. And it's ridiculous because I'm thinking, what's going on? The other thing is their brains aren't processing information the way that they should.
Mm-mm.
Their sleep is off, but that
Mm-hmm.
goes to adults too.
Mm-hmm.
And I deal a lot with trauma
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
of various kinds, and I wrote my thesis on that too in school. And so I noticed that trauma is a disruption of connection, right?
100%.
A
100%. Yeah.
disruption of connection, and at the point of that disruptive nature
Mhm.
event, the whole body becomes dysregulated.
It does. It does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's this, it's interesting when we experience that kind of trauma and we're overactivating the emotional networks in our brain, naturally, something called the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, this
Mm-hmm.
area that's kind of involved in our thought process, our fear monitoring, and then sending signals down to our body to say, hey, prepare yourself, and puts us into that fight or flight state. When that happens, the positive feedback loop between our brain and body disconnects. And again, going back to oxytocin, we can't feel
Mm.
connected with ourselves. So now we're living in our head where our nervous system is essentially trying to solve problems constantly, but those problems might not exist. There's a quote that I really like a lot I that is, your nervous system has never made a mistake, that it's just solving problems that might not exist anymore. And so when we go into that place where we've experienced trauma, our nervous system's trying to solve that problem constantly, but it's not in front of us anymore. And so now we're disconnected from ourselves, and we're just kind of not even able to attune to, like, who am I? What drives me? What gives me passion? What allows me to feel alive? And instead, we just get caught up in that loop and overthinking and overprocessing. And then it's really hard to connect with anybody else because we can't even connect with ourselves. So,
I
yeah, I think
that's
was.
that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm just so excited. Yeah. My brain's going 100 miles an hour, so I apologize for stepping over on you.
No,
But
please jump in anytime, and I'll just keep on talking if you don't.
look, me too. Look, the drive is interesting because now we're talking about psychoanalysis, right?
Hmm.
And so what drives us to do certain things?
Hmm.
I was telling a client, one of my clients, that they had some serious losses and things like that. And so I was trying to get them to reconnect with themselves, with their bodies, by
Mm.
establishing or reestablishing certain habits,
Yeah.
right? Certain schedules and things of
Hmm.
that nature. And I said, look, your brain needs to plan and needs to solve these problems. I diagrammed it
Hmm.
for them. And they looked
Hmm.
and they're like, wow, can I take a picture of this? And I'm like, yeah, that's why I put it on the board for you.
Brilliant.
Um, because people don't get it. They don't
Hmm.
know they that they need to look forward to certain things. I look at my grandmother who lived to be 92 years
Mm.
old.
Mm.
Great
Oh,
health until she wasn't, right?
yeah,
Till the very end.
that's great.
She lived a full life. She was never really sick. I've never known her to be sick or anything. And she enjoyed her life, but she was always going, like,
Hmm.
from
Hmm.
here to there, taking trips, and she volunteered when, and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, retirement isn't such a good idea.
No, yeah, right. That's it's a good point. It's a good point. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
the
We
brain
always
needs it.
we always
Yes.
need it. We need something to look forward to, even Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning,
Yes.
going through in the Holocaust and being in concentration camps. And it is the choice of, what am I living for? What is
Mm,
it that is my purpose right now? And for him,
mm,
he took that time to just hold every experience in his mind so that he could document it and write a book coming out of that. And that the acceptance of what was happening in the moment, and having purpose and putting
That's it.
meaning to the experience. And when we go from having a lifetime of a career and so much of our identity gets so wrapped up in that career, and then we just
Yeah.
stop suddenly, like the lack of identity, the lack of sense of self, the lack of passion, the lack of direction, we were never meant to do that. We were always meant to just transition into a new way of being. And the piece that you brought up with your grandmother about about volunteering, that the idea of acts of service towards others and all of the health benefits that that has for us. To be in a place of gratitude and service to others is one of the highest predictors of overall health. And that and to be in service to others and to also be motivated and be passionate about something that you're engaging in is so incredibly important. So important. Are you familiar with acceptance and commitment therapy?
No.
So it's amazing. It came out of Australia, and the creator of it, he's slipping my mind right now, unfortunately. But essentially, it's all about, as the name suggests, being able to move into committed action and having something that is a value that you are moving towards. And so most of
Mm,
us feel discomfort. And going back to what we talked about originally, we feel something that's off in our nervous system. We feel something that's just not quite right. And oftentimes, what we'll do is we'll say subconsciously, I don't like this feeling. I'm going to get
mm,
away from this feeling. And so we end up going into something that's an avoidant behavior, a
mm,
dopamine seeking behavior, a stimulus seeking behavior, something where we end up getting into resentment, we get into anger, we get into whatever. And that solves the problem in the short term. It's really effective at getting away from the discomfort, for about 90 seconds generally at a time until that dopamine wears off and it spikes our stress chemicals again. But if we are moving towards something that's a value, something that's an oxytocin based value, whether it's connection, integrity, honesty, just being self care, any of these types of things, we can move away from that discomfort and towards something that does foster more of that oxytocin through our system and allows us to move towards values. And I think that really at the root of what you're saying there is like
yeah.
that moving towards something and keeping moving towards something that is in alignment with your values, even in the midst of the discomfort. And the discomfort can be there while we're also experiencing fulfillment of kind of moving forward towards those things that are really important and valuable. That's what I heard when you were saying that.
That's wonderful. That's exactly right. Spot on. I got to tell you, you know, I've taken a lot of notes here. The movement piece is significant amongst
Mm-hmm.
all of the other pieces.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
tell my clients that the human being, the human body, and nature itself, life,
Yeah. Yeah.
even the cosmos, if you just conceptualize it, right?
Mm-hmm.
All built for movement, for progress.
Absolutely.
As a matter of fact, one of
Absolutely.
my favorite theorists,
Mm-hmm.
person-centered theory, you know, Dr. Carl Rogers,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
talked about this as one of the bases of his, psychoanalytic theory. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
is progress, right?
Yeah.
And the body, the mind rather, anticipates what you said earlier,
Mm-hmm.
the progress, and is
Mm-hmm.
bent toward progress given the certain conditions, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That you will automatically grow, lean, and consequently heal. Uh,
Absolutely.
I believe that. I practice that. Well, though insurance companies don't pay for that particular type of inside joke, everybody. Okay, yeah,
Uh-huh.
inside joke.
Uh-huh. Well, I'm curious in terms of, there's the physical movement, there's the movement towards progress, and then, there's the other side of it where we think we're making progress, but we're just spinning our wheels and kind of,
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, how do you help people notice that difference? How do you help them move from like the what's actually valuable progression and valuable movement versus just trying to get away from something? I'm curious if you what you do with that.
what I do is I have to compare and contrast. So
Mm,
I diagram it on, say, on the whiteboard for them
hmm.
to see the connections, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I outline or highlight with them there the connections between their current behaviors and some future behavior.
Hmm.
The current behaviors are usually what you call avoidant, what I call maladaptive.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I talk about the benefits and diagram it on the board so they can clearly see it and conceptualize it, the benefits of these maladaptive behaviors. I said, yeah, they do work.
Yeah.
They work great until they don't.
That's right.
You know?
Very true. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And I tell them that's why you've come to seek me out and you're sitting here
Hmm.
because now these maladaptive you've done for 20 years, 40 years, whatever,
Mm.
they don't serve you anymore.
No.
And
Mm-mm.
all of a sudden you need help. You're stuck,
Hmm. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And I said, so you come here. And so I take that and then I compare it to future behavior.
Okay. Hmm.
What is a future behavior? Let's now this is what when I use CBT on them, you know,
Hmm.
and I
Hmm.
said this is what your future behavior should look. This is the old behavior. This is the new behavior, and then we practice.
Hmm.
We practice.
Yeah.
So to drill it in or lock it in, as my old professor used to say, so that they don't forget. And through the practice piece, they internalize the mechanism.
Hmm.
And once they internalize the mechanism, the results happen. And they're
Yeah.
usually positive
Hmm.
if they work the program right. And I do stress that you have to work this.
Yeah.
It's not a
Yeah.
magic
It works
button.
if you work it.
Yeah, you got to
Yeah.
work it. And,
Yeah.
you didn't just get this way
Hmm.
today.
Hmm.
You're not going to undo yourself and correct yourself in a matter of moments. It might take a year, might take 6 months, might take 3 months. Who knows?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
they get it, and then once they
Hmm.
get it, they work it, and all of a sudden, they don't need me anymore.
Right. Well, what comes up as you're saying that, and I love it. And I love how much you're able to make it visual, experiential, and kind of that felt sense of like what a difference could feel like. Is
Yeah,
that, when we're stuck in our maladaptive patterns, and I wholeheartedly agree. I think maladaptive, every behavior was just an adaptive strategy at some point in our life. It worked for some things, and then we held on to it. It doesn't work anymore.
yeah,
And so really kind of taking the shame out of the behavior by
that's it.
recognizing it had a purpose. But then
That's
the
it.
other thing is that, there's that part of our brain or a network in our brain, the default mode network that holds on to our autobiographical memory. So it holds
Love
on
it.
to the like, this is who I am. This is what I do. This is all I can do. And then the only way to disrupt that is to bring in, and what ends up happening is that directs the salience network to basically shine the spotlight on evidence that supports that belief. And anything that doesn't support the belief, let's get rid of that evidence. Let's not, even if you do really well and you show up differently in a relationship, your brain still focuses on, no, here's the part where I could have done better or whatever it is for that person. And I think the cool thing about that style of being able to look towards what's the future look like for you, and that ends up creating this prediction error in the brain and this
Hmm.
cognitive dissonance to where what I expected to think about that moment now no longer fits. And
That's
that
it.
disruption allows the prefrontal cortex to come online to be able to say, wait a minute, there's another way. And now all of those networks actually work together rather than competing for resources. And then we can actually experience a new way of being. And that piece that you said about like, it's going to take a minute. And like, how do we actually sustain change? I'm curious if you see this frequently. What I oftentimes notice is people will have those epiphanies and those changes and really be able to show up in life in a different way, and then all of a sudden, they might go, a week, a month, 4 months, even a year. And then all of a sudden, they backslide. They drop back
Hmm.
into old familiar behaviors and patterns. And they go into a narrative of, this didn't work, or I'm not capable, or whatever. We see that a lot in like when people get treatment resistant. They've been in therapy for so long and they keep falling back into old patterns. And that, like from a neuroscience perspective, is quite literally just the brain can only sustain the increased metabolic load, so that it consumes a lot of extra energy to use new pathways. Old familiar pathways don't take a lot of energy. And
Mm-hmm.
so as we're holding those new pathways, not only are we growing new neurons, new dendrites, new pathways in our brain, but our brain is actually shearing off and getting rid of old pathways that we're saying, we're not using these anymore. Let's clean these out. And so I think it's really interesting when people have that shift, they start falling back. The brain is actually releasing a chemical called GABA to suppress the activity in the brain so that it can go into regeneration. It can go into consolidation. It can take all these new things that were learned and tie them together with other networks. But our thought process and our mind start saying, must have failed, must not have been good enough, must not. And so recognizing those narratives, those stories we tell ourselves when we go back into old patterns. But oftentimes I see when people fall back into old patterns, if I say like, you may have dropped back into drinking, or you may have fallen back into a dopamine seeking behavior, you may have fallen back into something that into a shame cycle. But did it feel the same as it did when you used to use those behaviors? Because
Mm-hmm.
when we learn new behaviors, we don't get the same dopamine hit as we used to. And so the
Mm-hmm.
relationship, the feeling that we used to get, that we really wanted from those behaviors, we don't get anymore. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if you see that pattern, and kind of how do you help folks when they are falling back?
There's certain individuals. So, say, take some of my trauma patients. They experience early childhood trauma mostly, right?
Yeah.
So, a lot of sexual abuse, a lot
Mhm.
of physical abuse, emotional abuse, and all that.
Yeah.
So, what happens is they'll go to something, a maladaptive behavior, say drug use,
hmm hmm
or say they go to hang out in the clubs again after
hmm
so long of therapy and stuff like that. And what will
hmm
happen is it doesn't feel the same.
hmm
It doesn't scratch that itch like it
Yeah.
used to, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I've got a couple that do that. I've got a client right now that I don't know. It's kind of interesting. It took a couple of months, and
hmm
they had some pervasive, persistent SI,
hmm
suicidal ideation,
hmm
and so we, working together, and all of a sudden that persistence have lessened. So I get them to, quantify it. I said, well, is it 0? Is it 5? Is it 7? Is it 10? Well, before it was a 10, now maybe it's a 7.
hmm
Or it could be a 3, right? And I monitor that, throughout the course of treatment, and to see what does that look like. Because the old behavior was, I'm going to go cut.
hmm
I'm going to cut. I'm going to do whatever. So we might, swap out. Well, instead of using a knife, not to be graphic, but
Yeah.
you know, uh, maybe you can go get a tattoo.
hmm Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the behaviors have changed when it
hmm
comes to, the methodology,
Yeah.
right? And the modality. We're going to change that, but we're changing something that's not harming the self, right? It's starting to help the self, and
hmm
along with that, I, impress upon them, hey, let's look at this in a different way.
Yeah.
What you're experiencing, what you're feeling, I impress upon them that this isn't going to be your state of being always. This
Yeah.
is a passing thing. This isn't
hmm
a forever thing. Whatever it is,
Yeah.
and so we highlight things like that, and I
Yeah.
have them practice in session and practice outside of session. I've had people get coloring books, you know, and
hmm
and and
Yep.
just just be a kid,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
in between sessions. And that tends to change, I think, some of their neurology when it comes to that. I've got a particular client right now that's using coloring books, and they're coloring like crazy, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And
Mm-hmm.
they're like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh my God, Chris, look at these, coloring books I've got, and I've got them of all kinds." And that's one way that they satiate that old way of being, and they
Mm-hmm.
tend to change it.
Yeah.
Is it a magic pill? No,
Mm-mm. No.
no such thing. I tell my
Mm-mm.
clients there's no such thing as magic pill, but will it lessen? Or as I tell my schizophrenic clients, do we turn the how much or how far can we turn the volume down?
Yes. Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
The
Mm-hmm.
head noise down, right? The
Yes.
voice is down. How much can we tune those down? And then if we
Mm-hmm.
could do that and that to get low enough, then we can deal with effectively, right? And
Mm-hmm.
healthy manner, the fact that yes, that noise is going to be there, but you don't have to listen to it.
That's right. That's right. I love that. It's so much wisdom in what you're saying. And the idea of being able to dial down the volume is directly related. That I use that analogy with overall nervous system activation.
Mm-hmm.
And if our nervous system is on the sympathetic side and we've got too much activation there, then the volume of all symptoms that we experience just get bigger and bigger. We're releasing cortisol. Our functional intelligence goes down by as much as 40%.
Wow.
And our ability to actually see solutions goes way down. And whether it's if I work with if folks that are business leaders, or I'm focusing on adolescents that are dealing with trauma response, that ability to decrease that noise, to be able to turn down the volume on the nervous system and drop into the parasympathetic nervous system is so crucial. And I love the coloring books thing. As we get to be adults, we think, all right, we're done with this playful kid stuff. We now have to
Yeah,
get serious about life. But we learn so much more when we are playing. We are meant to play.
that's it. Good.
And the other piece that pops up in my mind about that is there's these three things that I kind of hold on to as kind of a thing to remember for folks if they're stuck in a overactivated nervous system state. And it's a three C's. So it's connection, it's curiosity or creativity, and then committed action.
Love that.
Those three will allow you to shift from more of those maladaptive behaviors into more of those oxytocin based behaviors. And one of the cool things, I know I keep on going back to oxytocin, but it's one of those cool chemicals that does a lot for us. And it's one that actually changes the way that our receptor sites actually take in dopamine. So rather than getting this like quick hit that only lasts for about 90 seconds before it leaves, if we have oxytocin in the system, we can have a lot of dopamine come in the system. But what happens is it raises up what's called our tonic dopamine state. So now
Mm,
we have a lot more motivation, we have a lot more confidence, we have a lot more, interest in life. Whereas if we've got phasic dopamine, which is when you don't have a lot of oxytocin pairing with it, it's these spikes of dopamine. And for as high up as we feel, our brain has to go all the way down equally low in order to
mm,
rebuild that chemical. And
wow.
so one of the things we were talking about originally of like, everybody's experiencing all of this stress in life, and they're going and they're grabbing their phone, they're going and they're hopping on social media, they're going and they're doing these quick hit things. And there was a study recently that I saw that when you pick up your phone and you look at it, even if you're not looking at anything in particular, it decreases your cortisol levels by 17% for 7 minutes.
I
And
didn't know
so
that.
every time you pick up your phone, even if it's just the activate, it's the attachment to this thing somehow is going to alleviate my stress, or the not knowing of what's happening is spiking your stress. But as soon as you drop into the creativity, or you drop into the connection and really just talk to somebody, man, I'm feeling overwhelmed right now. I don't need you to do anything with it, but I'm just feeling a lot. And I
Hmm.
just need to name that right now. That
Nice.
release of oxytocin alone ends up creating in this kind of transition to where that the stress doesn't have as much of an impact, and it allows us to go into another thing you said there where everything will pass, this too shall pass. Everything is impermanent. It's going to, the good times are going to come and go, the bad times are going to come and go. And also our nervous system is experiencing every emotion possible at any given moment. And it
Right.
really is just whatever's screaming the loudest wins. So there's some choice in that of bringing awareness in those times of stress where we think, nope, this is all I have in front of me. I'm myopic, I'm tunnel visioned. My experience is overwhelming. That there is choice to remember, hey,
Yes.
everything will pass.
That's right.
Everything, good and bad, it all comes and goes. It's all just information, and changing our relationship to it to where it's not dire, it's not something that needs to be fixed, there's nothing broken, it's
That's
just
it.
something our brain is spotlighting in that moment. And I think that just it takes so much power out of it, and it's just kind of like, okay, then all I have to do is sit and observe and recognize that everything I'm feeling, everything I'm thinking, it's just a message coming from my body up to my brain, and my brain is just putting a story to it.
That's
And
it.
yeah, yeah. There was a guy that a long time ago that I was listening to that he used the whole analogy of, back in the day when the first movie theater had opened, and in the first showing, there was everybody sitting there in the audience, and all of a sudden the projector is projecting on the screen, and it projected a building on fire, and
Mm.
everybody in the movie theater jumped up and scrambled and trampled over one another to get out of that building. Their minds believed that seeing that fire on the screen meant the building was on fire that they were in.
Mm.
And then, go fast forward, and now we have these really high fidelity, really ultra high definition movies, and we can sit there and we can either be bought into the plot line or not. But back then it was all pixelated and black and white and couldn't see it hardly. But the nervous system of those people believed, "Oh, I don't know what this thing is. It looks like the
Yeah.
building's on fire. I got to get out of here." And the same
Yeah.
thing is true for the theater of our mind, that
Mm.
all of these stories and all of these things that we play through all day long, the things we tell ourselves about ourselves, I'm good enough, I'm not good enough, somebody else is better, I'm incapable, or even like I'm depressed rather than I'm experiencing depression, that the
Good.
all of that are, we can choose to either sit back and watch the plot and watch the movie and just observe it, just like it was, just something playing in the background. Or we can choose to believe that that plot line is real, and we can get embedded in it and caught up in it. And then it impacts our nervous system. It spikes us. It causes everything to get much bigger. And I think that visual it helped me, and it helps a lot of folks that I talk with about, like, hey, you have the capability to just sit back and just watch the movie. Just be entertained by it rather than having to actually believe it. And it's hard when you're in the thick of it to do that. But the more you can practice it and make that choice to show up to it and recognize that it all just goes away, and then things will come back. And then I think it lessens the noise a little bit and helps turn that volume down a little bit that we were talking about.
I love this. This is wonderful. I gotta tell you, you're it's spot on. Excellent conversation. I think these gems that you're dropping are incredible,
Thank you.
generative,
Mm.
and explosive.
Mm.
Man,
Mm.
I've enjoyed
Thank you.
this.
Me
This has
too.
been wonderful. We've got to do a part two.
Hey,
Uh,
let's do it. That
there's
sounds
so
great.
much to go over, and
Mhm.
I'm really excited. Glad to have you today.
Thank you so
This is
much.
an on time message.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I love what you're doing in the world, and that you are out there fighting the good fight with all of this and how you're supporting folks. And thank you so much for having me on. It's just a real pleasure to be here with you.
I thank you for being on. We'll schedule a part two for sure.
Sounds good.
Hey, everybody. Uh, This has been a great show. Y'all take care.